Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Leis, and I warmly welcome you to today's Esports Research Colloquium, the first one of the year 2022. I am really happy that Dr. Maciej Behnke and Lukasz Kaczmarek joined us to talk about what they have learned by studying games and gamers. The first time I heard of Maciej Behnke and Lukasz Kaczmarek was when I started looking into esports research more closely. Their papers, including the role of emotions in esports performance and social challenge and threat, predict performance and cardiovascular responses during competitive video gaming, quickly caught my attention toward them and their research. They both work at Adam Mickiewicz University Poznan in Poland. And here, Lukasz Kaczmarek is an assistant professor of psychology and head of the Social Psychophysiological Psychophysiology Laboratory. He is interested in positive emotions and positive relationships and application in various contexts, ranging from everyday experiences to video gaming. He received several research and teaching awards, such as the Rector's Award for Distinguished Teaching and the Positive Award twice, an award for outstanding publications in positive psychology by the Polish Positive Psychology Society. Maciej Behnke also won a number of awards and grants, including the Pelusium 13 and the OPUS 20 calls. He received scholarships awarded by the Minister of Science and Higher Education, the Adam Mickiewicz University Foundation, and he was a visiting scholar at Stanford University, University College London, and University of Chieti Pescara. Similar to his colleague Lukasz, Maciej is interested in the role of psychophysiological structure of positive emotions, especially in the context of esports. Honestly, I'm often surprised by the number of high-quality publications by both speakers. And as always, please feel free to actively participate in the discussion after the presentation and ask your questions. You can also ask your questions during the presentation using the chat function, and I will forward your questions when suitable to the speakers. Please also notice that this meeting is being recorded. And now, without further ado, I'm really happy to hand over to Maciej Behnke and Lukasz Kaczmarek. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, hello. Thanks for a very nice introduction, Oliver. So we want to welcome everybody to today's talk.
Hello, Atalay, Sophie, and Elinor.
And everyone who will watch this talk later. Thanks for the invitation, Oliver. We're truly honored to give this talk for Esports Research Network, where we're going to present some insights about our research on esports game and gamers. So, yeah. We want to encourage you to ask questions because we think that stories or results of our studies and the scientific discussion is already published in the papers. So if you have some questions about things that are not presented in the papers, you're more than welcome to ask them today. Oliver will do his best to forward us the questions. So please discuss our talk. Today we're gonna present you why esports research is beautiful, but also we'll give you some arguments why it is ugly. So the most, how would you say, like the most straightforward thinking about why the esports research is so great or amazing or beautiful is because games are great, aren't they?
Yeah, games are great, and also the games are great as a part of your work. Can you imagine anything more beautiful, than having games as a part of your work? And personally, for me, it was a game changer at some moment in my life, because I remember, I'm an old person. I don't look that old, I know, but actually I remember times where games are introduced into the world, virtually. And from the very beginning, and you probably might heard of that, gamers were stigmatized that they are doing something that is wasting your time, that you are wasting your time gaming. It was always very surprising for me because I never heard anyone saying you're wasting your time walking through the park, for instance, or taking hikes or anything like, or playing piano or playing chess. But when you're playing games, you're wasting your time. So at this moment, when games became part of my work, nobody any longer complains that I'm wasting my time playing, because I can always say, I'm working. And I can always personally have this feeling that while gaming, I'm working a little bit. And when I'm working with games, I'm gaming a little bit. So it's wonderful. Also, when your boss or my wife, for instance, because I usually work at home, not in the office like Oliver or like Maciej does. But, imagine your boss enters your room. If you are not working on esports or gaming, and your boss sees that you have Counter-Strike on your screen, that would be quite embarrassing, I think. But if you are an esport researcher, it happens, and it's very difficult. It would require a very intensive investigation from the boss to determine whether you are really playing for your own sake because you are enjoying it, or whether you were doing something for your game.
Yeah, I remember when we were testing some technical solutions for our FIFA study, and we played FIFA a lot in our office. We were also enjoying it and screaming and having all of these positive emotions. I remember that our neighbors or people from other offices came to our room asking us, like, what is happening here? Is it everything okay? Because we heard some screaming and like people having fun here. Is it really your office, or are you playing games? And then we had the perfect explanation that we were testing technical solutions for our experiments. So
yeah, and you can also buy a lot of wonderful things. The first high quality computer that I had the opportunity to play with was a computer from my university. In fact, I didn't like to spend too much money on computers. I always had this approach that it's not a good idea to have an expensive computer now, because there are so many outdated games that I've never played and they are wonderful. So how about I play a game that was released 5 years ago? I will still have fun, and I don't need to have the top-notch computer. But once you have funding from your university and from the National Science Center, you can buy the best. We were ordering a gaming computer last week, so we just scrolled through the list and took the best elements. And I would never imagine having an opportunity to interact with.
Yeah, and one amazing thing about studying esports research is that people want to listen about your studies, and it includes kids. I have 11 years old brother, and he is always interested when I'm telling him about esports research, not when I'm studying psychophysiology of positive emotions, but he wants to listen about esports research and games and gamers. He even consulted one of my latest research grant that he is very proud of, and I'm very proud of. So, kids sometimes can be very, very good solution to consult your research grants.
Okay, so these were just some intuitive ideas that we had when we started to generate a list of what makes esports research so exciting, so beautiful. Because why beautiful? Some guys ask us sometimes when we say that it's beautiful. Beautiful, it means attractive, right? It's something that's attractive and something that motivates you. strongly to do something about this. This is why we call it that it's beautiful. But now we will go through a checklist, a more systematic. Now we'll take a more systematic approach, because I developed some time ago a checklist. Because it happened to me that student asked me, or PhD students asked me, what makes a good research? So I made my own list, and quite surprisingly, if you take the first letters of these criteria, you'll get a very nice word. So Aimspace is a Aimspace checklist. So what makes a good research? Good research is a research that's attractive, that's intuitive, counterintuitive, that's meaningful, that's straightforward, prospective, advanced, cost-effective, and eudaimonic. So here's a list, and now we'll go through each criterion, and we'll try to see whether it's possible to support this idea that the esports research fits these criteria, meets these criteria. In what way? If you agree or don't agree with us, please comment, especially if you don't agree, if you have some other opinion about this or some additional arguments, we will be very happy to learn about them. So the first one, oh, it's a little bit random. So the first criterion is attractive.
Yeah, and this is very interesting for us, because we run a lot of studies in our psychophysiological lab, and you want to share your studies with the audience, with the people. And the difference between the studies done on esports and the gamers is that people are willing to share your stories and your conclusions. That happened for us with EFL Science portal, where we just asked the editors whether they want to publish the story about our study. And they thought that it's great, it's amazing study that they want to share. And the results were great, because as you can see on this slide, when they published this story about our study, it was shared over 160 times on Facebook. It was commented a lot, and it got about like 1,000 reactions on Facebook. We never experienced such a reaction to our studies, but when we shared our esports research, it happened. So we think this studying esports is attractive.
And perhaps some of, or I think most of you are interested in esports. And that's probably why most of your studies will be related to esports or a similar theme. And actually, I have a history of doing all sorts of research on all sorts of subjects, and I have a personal comparison. And I really know that this subject related to the typical health psychology subjects or typical well-being subjects, it's much more attention grabbing. It really is. So it's really fun to observe how the information about your research spreads. It's really exciting. But there is also a dark side to attractiveness, because attractiveness, it means that it attracts attention. So if people see more closely your research, you might also be confronted with more harsh evaluation of your research and some negative comments about this. It's quite difficult, it's the burden, it's the dark side of fame, right? It is in some way. If something makes you a little bit more famous, more people will attract, you will attract more attention, more people will look at it more closely. So but it's part of the territory, and you need to accept it. But we have a very difficult issue with Counter-Strike, because we met with very strong criticism. I will not tell you who criticized this, but a very important committee in our institution. and they said something like this, that it's bad. It's really bad that we are doing bad things in our laboratory because we promote the lack of tolerance. We promote aggressive and violent behavior, right? This is quite burdensome, especially if you're a psychologist. You wouldn't like to be accused of this. Of course, we know that it's not the way. We'll talk about this later. It's not the case. But still, you need to face such accusations, which is not very pleasant. Okay, so, but still, I think you'll agree. If no, please comment that it's attractive. It attracts attention.
Okay, the second letter in our acronym is I, intuitively contradictory. So we love when we can discover things. And this happens when people think in a one way, but when you run your study, you will discover something different. And so Lukasz will tell you the longer story later, but I want to share with you the example from our research. So about the FIFA study that we've already mentioned, we hypothesized that there are some emotions that will facilitate esports performance. And we thought that when you elicit emotions that have this connection to strong motivation, like anger, for instance, that you will be able to give some extra bonus for gamers to perform better, to be more successful. And that was our main idea, that the strongly motivated emotions will give you the extra extra thing to your skills to perform. But when we ran the study, we noticed that it was not the case. Anger was not helping gamers. Only positive emotions like enthusiasm and amusement gave them the extra thing, not only their skills, but also the emotions before the performance helped them to be more successful in a FIFA performance. So that was something unexpected for us when we ran the study, and we love it because you can discover things in esports.
And it perfectly fits a larger problem with games and gamers' perception. For us who are interested in esports, and you are interested in gaming, you know what's the community? It's a community where the majority of people are casual, good-willed, kind, forgiving, sociable persons, like in every other community. But the social perception, especially among baby boomers, earlier generations, like baby boomers, or even my generation. Actually, I'm one of the first persons of the generation X, I think, was it? So those who do not play, those who hear about games only when they watch media and when they hear some controversial stories about someone who did something wrong because of gaming, or who committed a suicide or some act of violence, or who is addicted and things like this, then these people have a negative social perception. So one of the aspects of the fact that esports research is counterintuitive, is that it's against the intuition of many people who are not interested in games, and who think that when you study games, then you will study perhaps social anxiety, addiction, violence, things like this. And they are quite surprised when they learn that you can use computers to study sports in the form of esports, but still it is nothing else but sports. So these are our arguments that it might be considered counterintuitive.
So the next letter in our checklist is meaningful. So, you know when the study is meaningful, when it gains some interest from different people. And here is the list of the different bodies or different agencies that think that also esports research is meaningful. For instance, the eager volunteers. So we never had the problem to recruit participants to our esports research. It also takes us much less time to recruit people to fill in some questionnaires when it comes to esports players, and you compare it to the regular or traditional sports. People really want to be the part of your study. So it's not only meaningful to us researchers who do the study, but also for the participants who are really willing to share their stories, to share their answers, and be the part of our study.
Yeah, even yesterday we had a similar discussion, and there was one of the persons in the audience who said, "My son, who's 9 years old, is watching you, and he would like to participate in your research." So, you know, they are very voluntary volunteers, because we usually say, okay, we test only volunteers, but you have two kinds of volunteers: those who volunteer because they say, okay, I will do it for you, I know that you will benefit, I will do it for the sake of science. But we really face with these eager volunteers, and it's a wonderful experience. I did my first research on gaming, on MMORPG players in 2008. After I did a couple of studies earlier, and I remember how difficult it was at the time to recruit participants. And once I put this online questionnaire to the MMORPG players, it was exactly a week and 1,100 participants, I think, with really, really little effort from me. It was a remarkable experience. I've never had such a large sample of participants before, and we all know the benefits of large sample. That it's a strong empirical basis for testing your hypothesis. So we really meet eager volunteers. As I said earlier, if you are doing only this type of research, you might not feel this. But if you have experience with other forms of research on other subjects, you might less attractive. You might have this comparison and see that it's so difficult to attract people to your research and to attract a diversity of people to your research. So I think that this is one argument that it really is meaningful, because it is meaningful for these people. They see meaning in this. If they are so much motivated to help you, they probably see that there is some meaning in it. And the other argument that it's from the other perspective that shows how meaningful it is related to citations. This is the other way around. Once you have your research, you want to share it with the community, and every researcher thinks that their research is meaningful, that people need it. That's why they do it in the first place. But then you very often get confronted with the reality, and you see that, the research is wonderful, very meaningful, but not people are really interested in referring it to in their own research. So it's not that much contributing to the science. And yeah, my personal experience is that I did a lot of research on various subjects, and I can do nothing about this, but the most highly cited papers are about games. It's a paper about MMORPG players, and it's a paper about Pikachu. About Pokemon Go. the mobile game, wonderful game, but still, these were very simple studies, very easy to perform actually, didn't cost anything, I would say in Polish, didn't cost nothing. But still, compared to other papers that we publish that, you know, cost like $100,000 to perform, and still they get the highest citation rate. And given that the creativity studies show that your best achievement is usually achieved when you are 40, then it means that I will be remembered as the Pikachu guy, not, you know, the guy who did some research on stress, happiness, and things like that. So it shows that it's really meaningful for the community, for the scientific community, because they really cite this. They really need to back up their own thinking, their own ideas, their own research projects with the ideas that you generated earlier. And it's a wonderful feeling having known that it's meaningful.
Yeah, exactly. And one great thing also about esports is that people from editorial boards and from grants committee, the reviewers, really like that you do your research in the game context or in the game environment. So you might be surprised by it, but when we publish our study in emotion, that it's related to the general phenomena of emotion, or more general to psychology, the editor noted that in the context of COVID pandemic, it's nice that we're studying esports and games that brings also very, very helpful context about the social isolation, and it might be very important study for the later on. And the same with the reviewers of our grants, that they always give us the feedback that it's very innovative to do the research in such an environment or test the psychological hypothesis within the gaming context. So it's not surprising that esports and gaming enthusiasts cite your work and are willing to participate, but also people from the more general context of science and psychology also admire your gaming work or your research on esports.
Yeah, and as Maciek said, we are really happy because there is really an increasing appreciation of esports research. It's partly related to the COVID pandemics, I think, but I think that COVID pandemics only accelerated certain processes related to the perception of the bright side, the majority of the phenomenon, rather than only the dark side of gaming, which is really about less than 10% of the whole gaming group. So we are really happy that World Health Organization said that that games are a wonderful tool to maintain physical distancing with social connectedness. That's wonderful. And we have a question.
May I interrupt you here? You said it's fine to interrupt you, and I have to acknowledge that I totally agree that the development increased and that the appreciation of esports research increases as well. But I also made the experience that some journals are still against esports research, which is confusing. At least this was the experience I made last year. But there's an beneficial development, I would say, just to add this information, that I made the opposite experience as well.
Okay. Do you also have the question for us, or was it only the personal comment?
I think it was fine to share a personal comment. You asked for it, and
yeah, great.
There it is. But I agree. So,
okay, so straightforwardness, or clarity. This is something. This is something that also should be appreciated, and it's not that straightforward to think that it's the advantage of esports research. But we think that it really is the case that there is a great advantage of using games and inviting gamers to your research. Because if you are doing an experimental research, in most cases, you invite your participants, your volunteers, to do something, to engage them in some task-related activity. And in most cases, if you do other type of research, you need to explain what they should do. Sometimes you say why they should do it, but not always. Like I did my first research for my PhD was a research on stress, and I asked people to sum, to add numbers, right? A typical arithmetical stressor. And it was, I really saw that some people were really puzzled with this, why they should do it in the first place. What's the point of adding so many numbers in your memory if we have calculators nowadays? It's completely ridiculous. So you really need to explain this to them. Many of them didn't, imagine that it was a really purposeful task. And if you compare this with gamers, with a situation in which you invite someone, you say, please sit down and now play Counter-Strike. 4 matches, deathmatch, and that's it. And this person immediately knows what's the task. And it's a difficult task. It's not an easy task. It's a difficult task. But you need to just to say what the person is required to play and to try to achieve the highest score. And that's it. And every participant immediately knows what he's required to do. He knows that he needs to use that they need to use their mouse, the keyboard, kill as many people as they can, not get killed. And that's it. A wonderful, very complex activity that you have immediately, and it's clear for you, and it's clear for the research participants. It's wonderful. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and also my personal experience is that sometimes they are bigger experts than you are. So when me or the other experimenters were trying to explain something to them, we were sometimes asked the question that we were not able to answer about some technical solutions within the game, because they want to adjust every property of the game that works best for them. So sometimes some of the experimenters were not able to answer some questions. So they sometimes are bigger experts than people that run a study. So that's also very nice about running studies on experts, in this case on esports players. And what I love about esports research, it's also the clarity for readers. So I remember when I faced the psychology papers first, and I was trying to figure out what people have done during the study, for instance, with some cognitive task, go, no go task, or the Stroop test. It was sometimes confusing for me, like how to calculate the specific index, or like what exactly is meaningful for this index. But with gaming or with the esports performance, if you are gaming enthusiasts, you know what they did during the study, how the numbers were calculated. In FIFA, it's easy. It's just the electronic soccer, or football. So you exactly know what happened during the game and what kind of stats we or other scholars use in their research. So it's a great also clarity for readers.
But now, when Oliver said that he faced this negative attitude of some reviewers or editors, it makes me think. Imagine that it has this straightforwardness and clarity for us. But imagine a reviewer who has never played Counter-Strike, and then you try to I think that this person is not able to understand the complexity of the game mechanics and the complexity of experience that you have during this game. So it will definitely, it won't be straightforward to such persons, and it's a problem. It's a problem.
I can also believe that some people within the traditional sports field have this attitude to esports that it's not really a sport. So why should we publish it? Oliver, can you give us a sign? Was it the sports related journal or more general psychology? Sports related journal. Okay, so sometimes I can also believe in it that some people within the sports field still have this attitude that esports really is just like artificial activity that you perform on computers. It's not really a sport. But we know that when you're using the objective criteria about like which activity is a sport and which is not a sport, most of the esports games or esports can be classified as a sport. So I think we don't have to debate this once again on this channel.
So another criterion is that a good study is a study that says something, but generates new questions, generates new ideas. I mean, it stimulates you to ask new questions once you know one answer. So we call it prospective. And so you can, when you face a research, it's also like Oliver said at the very nice introduction, that it got his attraction, and he probably thought, okay, how could I do something about this? Perhaps something like this. I could use this method, for instance. I could use this method of recruitment or this analytical strategy. But you know, games are wonderful because once you learn about games, once you learn about how wonderful it is to have a game set up at your laboratory, you immediately start to perceive games not as some specific tool. I mean, some specific form of activity. But you may start to perceive games as an environment, as a gaming environment. So if I have games and if I have players playing games, I can ask a lot of questions. I just have a person, and in most cases, highly motivated individual in a task situation, and I can ask all sorts of questions related to emotions, as we mostly do, but also to some other areas like cognitive processes, social relationships, communication, gender differences, all sorts of it. And I think that, you know, it would be really wonderful to have people who are not interested in games, who know nothing about games and about esports, and to ask them, what are you studying? What's your research? And this person says, I'm interested in this and this. And I say, okay, you might very, very nicely, very neatly study this process during gaming. What do you think about this? Right? So I think that we have started to explore a huge environment. And nowadays, there's about 1 billion people who are interested in video games, who play video games regularly. So it's a huge environment in which people attend regularly, and you might say the almost majority of people attend to it regularly. And I think there is a huge potential to expand gaming research and esports research into some other forks and to some other places.
Yeah, games as an environment. So based on our experience, we run about 2,000 participants in our lab in the last 5 years. And we tried different emotion elicitation methods. We used pictures, we used film clips. We asked people to reimagine some kind of situations to elicit emotions. But you know, watching people that play the games was just eliciting emotions at different level. Because, you know, when people watch some kind of funny movie or sad movie, they experience the sadness or amusement at some kind of level. But when you look at gamer that is winning the very hard game or losing very close one, you can really see the emotions. It's not only that they experience them, but they also express them. And I believe that you can elicit even stronger emotions with using gaming and games while you're doing your research. So we think that it's a great advantage to study some psychological phenomena or the phenomena from different scientific fields while using gaming in your study.
Yeah, and anyone who saw a person who's, you know, cheering that they won a game would say, wow, what would I have to do in my laboratory to make a person be happy so much, right?
Yeah.
What could I do about this, especially if these were children, right? But on the other hand, right, if you want to study anger, what can you do in your lab to elicit anger? Like there are some tools, like, you know, building a house with playing cards, and then your research confederate destroys it, and people quite often get angry about this. But it really is wonderful, especially, you know, after a couple of studies where I elicited emotions using IAPS pictures, right? Especially after this time, it's so wonderful to see people cheering, people, you know, feeling depressed, almost crying, getting angry. This is what we want to study: real emotions, and this is what this form of research does. And also, we went a little bit further, I think, yeah, with only documenting how prospective it is, but. And another criteria is that it's advanced, or that it's at the peak of the mountain, at the border of what we already know. Maciej, do you feel being a pioneer?
Yeah, in some way, for sure. For instance, we had to develop the lab procedures, how to use games within the experimental context. It wasn't that easy at the beginning because, you know, for instance, if you want to study CSGO players, when you look at tournament, you have five individuals line up as a team, and they play with a different team playing rounds. And it's hard to adjust this kind of setting to the experimental room. So you have to think like which kind of setup within the game you can use to be able to fit the game into the experimental setup. But I think what is great also about esports research is that you have this feeling that this is exactly the thing that should be studied now. Do you have it?
Yeah, I have it. And one formal argument to indicate that it's pioneering, that this is a pioneering endeavor, is that you can ask, would it be possible to study this 20 years ago or 30 years ago? It wouldn't be. Like, if you ask a question, was it possible to study the influence of positive emotion on cardiovascular recovery from stress 20 years ago? It was possible. 50 years ago, it was possible. You were able to ask these questions and to find answers. Was it possible to ask about how people play computer games 50 years ago? It wasn't, because there were no computers. So this is a formal argument that it's a highly pioneering endeavor.
Okay, we think that using esports is also very cost effective, because when I was thinking what should I study, I always knew that I wanted to study something real. and because I'm related to sports for most of my life, I knew that I want to study sports, competition, performance, but something that is real. And, you know, it's quite cheap to study esports performance in the experimental setting or in the laboratory, because the only thing that you need is high quality computer. So we think that it's not using esports, it's not only giving the natural environment for performance, for esports performance, but it's also quite cheap to study the real performance, something that is called in the scientific terms, it's ecologically valid, that it's really related to things that people do in their natural setting.
Yeah, because when gamers play, they sit in front of the computer. In our research, they just need to sit in front of the computer. And another wonderful thing is that playing games is in fact exchanging information, exchanging digital information between computers. And this is exactly what we want to have. So games are, and esports is self-generating a lot of data that you can use in your study. It's not the case with athletes. If you want to study sports, of course, you can get a lot of information, like the FIFA is a perfect example. If you want to have people playing on a real grass field, you can analyze their behavior later and to count the number of passes, to count the time of ball possession, things like this. You can hire people to do this. You can ask PhD students or students to do it. It's possible, but when people are playing esports like FIFA game, it's inevitable. You just have this information. You do not need to do anything else. Just computer does this for you, because it's part of the system. So you have people playing, and you immediately get lots of wonderful data about their behavior. It's absolutely not comparable to the athletic performance, and it greatly contributes to the cost effectiveness of gaming research.
Yeah, I remember when we get our first revision of our FIFA study, in the original manuscript, we wanted only use the goals ratio. But then one of the reviewer asked us, can you add more stats about the performance to your model? And you know, with the FIFA, it was quite easy. We had the statistics, so it did not require any additional analysis, hiring students or doing it by ourselves, watching the hours of people playing games and just annotating the data. We just had the data, so it's really wonderful that playing games generates the data.
Okay, access to athletes. Did we talk about this?
A little bit about recruitment. I think it's just great how easy it is to recruit people for esports study. So it's also cost effective, because when you think, for example, about the paid ads on Facebook to recruit people to fill in your questionnaires, it's just way easier to recruit gamers because they're also there. So when you recruit people in social media, gamers are usually there. It's not the case for regular athletes. It's just way harder to recruit them.
Okay, and the last but definitely not least question is about the personal perspective, because people have this motivation to self-explore and to self-express, to learn who you are and what you like, and do something about this, to self-express. It's called the eudaimonic perspective, one of the approaches to happiness. And actually, esports research makes us, at least us happy. it's as long as you feel the beauty of technology, which is mostly my experience, or the beauty of sports,
which is my experience.
Which is Maciej's experience. Actually, I hate sports. I mean, I love esports, but I hate physical movement. I don't know why, but it is the case. So as long as you feel this, as long as you feel this intriguing, strong emotion towards technology, as I do, and in my personal story, I think that meeting with computers, making friends with computers was one of the most exciting experiences in my life. I was about 6 or 7 years old. It was ZX Spectrum, one of the earliest personal computers. My friend invited me he asked, would you like to play computer games? I was intrigued. What is it? Really? I know that for you, it's not, for your generation, it's stupid, right? It's like imagining a world without Facebook, right? Or without internet. I remember this period. I'm a really old person. He said, would you like to see a computer? And I said, okay, why not? And then I saw this game. It wasn't, you might perhaps consider it an esport game, because there were 2 cowboys, one at each side. You were able to shoot, and there was a cactus between them, and there was a carriage going from up to the bottom, from top to the bottom. And we were shooting at each other. It was so wonderful. We used to play war with our sticks, with some wooden sticks earlier before we met the computers. Actually, when people say, "Oh, it's Counter-Strike is a horrible game because people kill each other," we didn't have computers in in the 80s of the past century. We didn't have computers, but we were killing each other all the time. We were running with wooden sticks through the woods. And sometimes we were, physically fighting with each other, even if the emotions aroused a little bit more. So there was a lot of aggression, physical aggression, a lot of competitiveness, forming teams. We had it all. It's not that Counter-Strike or Fortnite just constructed something that it's not a part of human experience across the ages, I think. But it was this wonderful experience early on. And now when I have this opportunity to be close to this wonderful part of the world, one of the most wonderful parts of the world, computers, it produces in me a strong eudaimonic experience, which is lovely about esports, and it contributes greatly to my part of this esports research beauty.
Yeah, I feel really similar to Lukasz, but my feelings are related more to the competition and performance and sports. But I want to also share with you a different thing about what was very surprising for me, that we're helping people by running esports research. That was something unexpected, because when people came to our lab, I've heard for the first time, thank you for taking us seriously, that you're not studying us as some kind of freaks or nerds. You're treating us as gamers, as sport players. So that was very nice to hear from our participants, that they admired that we were taking them seriously as professional gamers or semi-professional gamers. That was really a game changer for me to see that, yeah, that's the thing that we should study. So and especially from this angle, from the esports angle. No,
so you want to be a good person.
Yeah, I always wanted.
Okay, so we are very happy that we have very little time to cover the ugliness of esports research. So because we have like 2 minutes, so we'll go very quickly through it, but we would like to publicly acknowledge and say that we know about this. We know about this because we are very often accused or even forced when we discuss with some people. Admit that it's bad, that there is something bad at it. Admit that there is violence. Admit that there is addiction. Yes, there is. We know about this. There are hundreds, no, not hundreds, there are thousands or tens of thousands of papers about this. There are practitioners who are very much dedicated to these problems. We know that games are modern triggers of aggression. They are. They are not the major triggers because there was aggression when there were no games, and there is aggression especially in youth, in the regions when games are almost absent. And there is also a lot of aggression there. As I said earlier, I got my first computer when I was 7 years old. And until that time, no one in my village had a computer. And there was a lot of child aggression, physical aggression, beating. We had other triggers. There were addiction, substance users, things like that. We all knew that. And people really like to scapegoat gaming. They really like to scapegoat gaming. They say, the world would be a better place if there were no computer games, right? It even rhymes. If it rhymes, it means that it's true. And it's not the case. It's not the case. It's a dark side. We should be aware of this. Luckily, there are lots of psychologists who are dedicated to this subject. One of the most famous and most cited authors, like Griffiths, is publishing, he himself is publishing about 300 papers annually about addiction. So it's well covered. We know this. It's ugly. We wouldn't like to have a lot of this, but it's not what we are. It's not actually what you are interested in if you are doing esport research, right? The same problem is with addiction to sports.
Yeah. That was very interesting for me because, like, for my PhD exam, I got this question like what is the percentage of people that are addicted to esports? And then I digged in to the regular or traditional sports addiction. And do you know that there are very similar number of people that get addicted to games and to regular sports. It's about from 3 to 8, 10% of people doing this activity. So it's not something very specific to games. It can be very specific to some games, but in general, it's something similar to different kind of activities that people do in their life.
Yeah, the uncomfortable part of this phenomenon is that no one says, people get addicted to physical activity, which is true, right? A couple of percent does that, and they say you shouldn't study physical activity because it's addictive to some people. So if you do it, you're promoting something that's addictive, right? But it is so. And another ugly part. Is it necessary? Right, Maciej, don't you think that you are a skillful and dedicated person who would like to do something good for the world? Don't you have a bigger problems than asking how people can play Counter-Strike more effectively?
So personally, no. Like I think performing and competition was the big part of my life, and it was very important for me to do my best. When I was a dancer or a swimmer, it was always the central point of my interest. So when I can choose the topic to study scientifically, I had no doubts to choose the performance, and especially esports performance, which fits great, as we've already told you, to experimental psychophysiology that we do in our lab.
And in fact, because I said earlier that I devoted some of my time to happiness studies, to positive psychology. And it's also a very similar situation, because sports, it's something that is related to activity that it's positive, right? That it's something that's not necessary to do in your life, because, it's not about disability, it's about superior performance. Why would you, devote a lot of energy to study what can a person do to run faster if you might devote your time and energy to people who have problems with walking at all, right? So it's a huge old dilemma, but it's a demagogy when you say that you should focus only on the negative aspects, on resolving the negative aspects of life, because we need something that attracts people. We need to define positive goals. We need to search and to present the most beautiful parts of human abilities, because it inspires also those who are in need. And we live not only because we want to avoid misery in our life, we want to be happy. And that's also one part of answer to this ugliness, this seemingly ugliness of esports research.
So it's time for summary.
Yeah, brief summary.
So we think that study esports is the great balance between the great things and beautiful things about E, which is about all the technology stuff, and sports, which I really love.
It's refreshing, definitely.
It's a new phenomena, something that hasn't happened in the past.
Mm-hmm. If you're interested in sports, we believe that there are many advantages of why you can study sports processes in esports better than in athletes.
Like with the gaming context, you can create great research solutions just by using games.
And if you are studying esports and gaming, you study problems that people really have, that people confront daily, and billions of people. So it's meaningful.
And also be prepared when you're running esports research, be prepared for questions about the addiction, aggression, prejudice, and stigma. You will face them because people always will ask you them.
So we believe and we hope that you agree that esports research meets perfectly the stringent criteria of Aimspace. So it's Aimspace certified. We are looking forward to any of your comments. If you would like to receive some further assistance from us, or any form of help, do not hesitate to write to us. And we are very, very dedicated to the community and to do the best we can to support it.
And it's not a joke. We really invite you to the internships in our lab. If you are a student or a researcher that you would like to run some kind of studies in Poland, we can help you with the lab environment. And we have also big experience with getting funds from the National Science Center in Poland. So we believe, and they are open to esports research, as we showed you with our research grants. So if you are willing to come to Poland and study esports in Poland, please come to Poznań, join our lab. We'll be happy to have you.
And thanks for watching.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I also highly liked the way you expressed your joy and your pride in researching and studying esports and games. Yeah, thank you for that. I would start with a question myself, because so far we have no question in the chat. Feel free to ask your questions using the chat function or raise your hand, and I will forward your question, or you can unmute your microphone and talk to the speakers. I would stick with the bad and the ugly and start with a question for that, if you're fine with it. And I would like to know if you have experienced some problems or difficulties when you try to conduct studies with expert players doing the measurements. Was there something that you didn't expect in the first place, or something that needs to be acknowledged when you research esports? Yeah.
So I think I can say about the study with the CS:GO tournament. That was something unexpected for us, because we announced the study as a CS:GO tournament. And what was surprising for us, not now surprising, but then, that, you know, when people come to the lab very motivated, it's hard to measure baseline psychophysiological baseline. You know, people came to our lab, they were just sitting and waiting for the game, and they had heart rate the level of 90. So, you know, and that was quite problematic for us, because like, how much higher can it get when you're sitting and playing games? So I think that was quite ugly for us. Obviously, we use it as an opportunity to explore this kind of phenomenon and explain it a different way. But I think it was kind of an ugly thing about studying esports in the form of tournament, because when people were that motivated, it was really hard to measure psychophysiological baseline. Yeah, that's my answer.
But do you ask about expert players? Because
I'm interested in both expert and amateur players. Do you have?
I always have this problem, right, with distinguishing. I mean, between problem with mixing both groups, because it can differ. But did we have some expert players in our samples?
In the lab, like when you're telling about like professional players that compete internationally, no, we didn't. But you know, when we run some kind of studies, the self-report studies, it was also quite hard to, you know, when you're trying to compare gamers to regular athletes, it's hard to find similar categories, because, you know, when you're thinking about athletes being paid and gamers being paid, there are different proportions within those two populations. So that's also, it was also quite problematic.
We have some interesting question from Mark Campbell. This is what if we had even more grant funding, what would be your next step? What would the next steps be for your lab about psychophysical research in esports?
So I have one idea.
The sky is the limit.
So I have one idea, because if we are talking about taking the tournament, the real tournament, to the lab, you know, then you would have to have the space for 10 players, each player being connected to the psychophysiological apparatus. So I think that's our goal, to have the lab where we will be able to study 10 people at the same time competing with each other. So if you have a couple of millions of dollars to spare, just call us. We'll be happy to build such a lab and to run such a wonderful study.
I'm also as I said earlier, I really like technology. When I purchased my first physiological equipment, it was a kind of this experience that I described earlier regarding my first contact with computers. You know, there is something intrinsically rewarding for me when I see that, you know, we have this huge panel with all sorts of physiological signals. So at the back of my head are some ideas how we might proceed with introducing more and more signals. There are many interesting research, not many, but there's some promising research regarding the vascular activity of your facial vessels. like we were thinking about using laser Doppler to measure blushing or the removal of blood from your face, for instance. Temperature measurements are wonderful research to ask quite similar questions. And this is something that, you know, using a camera sensitive to infrared light, it's quite expensive. It's surprisingly expensive, because I already contacted a couple of companies that do it. And I'm also not sure whether at least those companies with which I was talking with said that there might be not adequate methods, analytical methods to process the image of a moving face. And we wouldn't like to have Counter-Strike players, you know, heads fixed throughout the whole experiment. That would be really, really awkward. We played a little with legs movements. It was also quite promising. We tried 3 different approaches to that, like accelerometry, goniometers, and tensometric platforms. So we will definitely pursue some other venues to expand the psychophysiological equipment. But in terms of psychophysiological questions, it's more difficult question. We'll have to think about this.
Yeah, and also I had different idea about like, it would be great if some kind of game developers would be willing to create the game for psychological experiments. You know, it would be amazing if you could create the game to set the specific social situations or like having some kind of emotional situations within the game that, you know, people are playing for an hour and you have, let's say, 12 different situations that all people have to solve, play in different way. So you have like psychological experiments within the game when people are motivated to play and very interesting to interact with it.
Like modding, I think it might be a best idea to have some form of modes. So you know, Valve is the developer of CSGO, right? So they say, okay, guys, we were attending, you know, your lecture, and we think that Maciej's idea was wonderful. So we will devise the Counter-Strike Research Edition, right? Counter-Strike version when you can pre-program certain psychological scenarios, right? That your participants will meet. This would be wonderful. So Valve, if you're listening to us, I think, or Epic Games.
I'm not sure whether Mark is working on this kind of software, because I remember from his lecture that they were kind of developing kind of tool where you can hard program some kind of situations within the gaming context. It was very closely similar to CSGO. But about what kind of equipment do we use or recommend? We are very happy with Ad Instruments, with the company from New Zealand.
Yeah. In general, our approach, and I think it's a generally good strategy to go not to look at psychophysiological research. I always say to Maciej, although I not always follow my own recommendations, which is frequently the case, but not to look at psychophysiology, rather to look at physiology, because we have quite interesting cooperation with cardiologists. And they really introduce some methods of measurement to us that are not already that much represented in psychophysiology. Even if you consider, for instance, taking blood pressure measurements, if you talk with cardiologists, they will say, okay, arm is a good place to measure blood pressure, but it might be a much better idea to focus on systemic blood pressure that you can take on your neck, right? You have a special equipment. I've never seen any psychophysiological research to use this equipment. Or they say why don't you study arterial stiffness, right? This is a very important signal. Not many psychologists use it in their psychophysiological studies. So we'll definitely go into this direction, or some analytical methods to process signal. They're crazy about this. And I have some trauma, actually. I have some trauma regarding this, because when we published our first study in psychophysiology, I was very happy that we have so many signals and so many methods to process the signals. At first we reported the whole list, and then they said, oh, it's phishing, it's capitalizing on chance that something will be significant, and things like that. So I think that our community is really against exploration, which is rather a bad thing regarding science, because an honest exploration is a great thing. But if you say, okay, we measured arterial stiffness, and they say, why did you measure it? What's the theory behind this? So it makes us actually focus on the, for instance,
well-studied.
For instance, to focus almost exclusively on challenge and threat and pre-ejection period, cardiac output, those really well-established parameters, and to lose the fun and this excitement of exploration using new methods of measurement, new equipment, and new analytical methods available in the physiological literature. So we don't have anything particular in mind at this moment, but definitely we think that physiological research is the way to go.
And also, what is very nice about esports research is that people from computer science are interested in studying games and gamers. So this is what I've learned from working with computer scientists, that they are more willing to explore new stuff, or like also creating new apparatus, or using new technologies or analytical approaches. So I think it's nice that we target esports research from the different angles, and probably will, all together we'll be able to get the great knowledge from it.
Eleanor asks quite an accurate question. Did you find total hours of playtime to be a good, accurate reflection of CSGO expertise?
So we even use it in our paper.
It's our model.
Yeah. We even use it, the number of hours, and it's so helpful about games. Try to imagine that you want to calculate your experience within the traditional sport. Try to calculate how many hours you played soccer in your life.
Mm-hmm. How many kilometers
did
you make running?
Almost impossible to calculate them. But with the CSGO, you just enter the engine of the game and you have the exact number of hours played with your account. Isn't it wonderful that you have the stats of the amount of experience that you have within the game, and you can use it in your research? That was something that we really liked about and we still like about esports.
And as far as I remember, it was a significant predictor.
The best predictor in our study.
Of challenge appraisal. So people who had higher times reflected in their gaming system really felt more confident, and they achieved better outcomes later.
Yeah. I think it was the same with the FIFA study, that the amount of time within a week, because with the FIFA we didn't have the exact number of the total number of hours, but the daily, but the weekly hours of esports training, and it was also the significant predictor of couple of measure of outcomes of the FIFA performance.
Yeah, and it's great also in order to learn about similarity of your experiences. So as I would interpret this, it means that you also think that esports is beautiful, and esports research is beautiful.
Thank you. By the way, you do really well forwarding the questions to yourself, and thanks to the audience for asking such good questions. I would add a question of mine, and Maciej, you talked about transferring the game environment or the game into the laboratory environment. And do you also do this with professional players or experts? And are there some things that we have to consider when we do so?
So we haven't tried it yet, because one of the reasons was the very practical reason about running a study and achieving high statistical power. You know, it would be extremely hard to find enough professional gamers to conduct the study where you will achieve enough power to measure very delicate relations within the gaming context. So I think we first wanted to learn more general stuff, how to run a study, how to recruit participants. But I think it's a great next step in our research. You know, maybe the more ecological approach would be take your lab and go to the boot camp, for instance. You know, because it's not that hard. We can just use the laptops with some physiological measures and go to the boot camp and then test players there, rather than bring people from all around the country to your lab. It would be much harder. So I think it will be next step. I'm not sure whether our new PhD student is willing to do it, but we'll encourage her to maybe just try to collect some data on professional players during some kind of boot camps or meetings in their places.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this because, you know, there are also many players, many veterans, and they are not that old. Perhaps it might be a good strategy, because, you know, when you're a professional esports player, you usually start when you're about 16, taking part in tournaments, and you are retired when you're 30. So they have very, very short careers, and it might be a good idea to test some veterans. Yeah. They have high skills, but they might be probably more likely to contribute in any way to still be, you know, in game.
But still, we were very happy that participants in our study can be called as semi-professional gamers, because, you know, when you're spending about 16 hours per week training some kind of traditional sports, probably you would call yourself as a semi-professional athlete, or very engaged athlete for sure. And I think if we're taking the same lenses to esports players, we also had quite experienced gamers in our studies. So they were not lay people that came to the lab and played, but they were experienced players, at least as much as experienced as they could be. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your great and interesting answer. I think we have time for another question. And until a question is posted in the chat or someone raises his hand, I want to say that it's also nice to go to an actual competition, not only a training camp, but I think a training camp will be a great start to see and get used to the environment itself. But then we have also some game-specific rules and settings that we need to consider. For example, we want to investigate League of Legends in the future, and there the doors are closed 10 minutes before before the players start their gameplay, and then we don't have measurement points immediately before gameplay or before competition, which is also something that might limit the results. But yeah.
Are there any rules for wearing wearables?
Yeah, with Bluetooth especially, and yeah, they might benefit the players.
Okay.
I would like to emphasize one important thing that Maciej mentioned also, because there is a huge problem with running field studies, and it pertains to what Maciej mentioned, the statistical power, because the psychological influences, especially if you want to grasp the physiological responses that are mostly influenced by physical activity during gaming, because there is muscular tension, there are rapid movements, so the influence of physical activity is vast. So if you want to dissect the psychological, the emotional, motivational influences, you really need a large sample, right? Imagine that we recruit only half of our participants. We have no findings, virtually no findings in the last study, right? And we had 240 participants, each one playing 5 games.
Yeah.
So it's like
in total
1,000 cases, right?
Yeah.
So imagine that you go to run a field study, you are very happy, you have real experts playing in real settings, and you have no findings. It can happen unless you measure 1,000 of them or 100 of them on 10 occasions. Then it's okay, right? But you need to be really aware of this, because it can turn into a nightmare. Thank you, Mark.
I totally agree. Thank you so much for your great presentation, Lukasz and Maciej. Thank you to the audience for joining. And yeah, if you have any last words, this is the time.
Thank you for the invitation. Let's keep together.
Yeah, don't hesitate to contact us via our social media or emails. It's easy to find in the social media, or you can just type our names in the web. It should be quite easy to find us.
Yeah, and I will Google Eleanor's hide the Counter-Strike paper, because I think I might have skipped this. So that's what I'm going immediately to do. Oh, not published yet.
So send us the manuscript. We're very interested to read it.
We'll not copy your research.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to future high quality publication of yours and also collaborations. I will apply for grant to visit you in Poznan, and have a nice day. See you in, I think, at least a month.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Thank you. Have a nice day.